My husband looked at me and said, "I'm leaving you for your best friend. I'm happier with her." In that moment, it felt as though my entire world had collapsed. But just 1 week later, I received an unexpected phone call from a probate attorney. "Ma'am," he said, "your former husband from the 1990s has passed away and left his entire estate to you. However, there is one condition." Hello, everyone. This is Diana once again. I'm happy you've joined me today. Before we begin, please take a moment to like this video, stay with me until the end, and tell me in the comments which city you're listening from. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. For most of my life, I believed I had built something steady and dependable. It wasn't exciting or extraordinary, but it felt secure. My name is Catherine Marsh, and I had been married to Derek for 11 years. We lived in a modest, colonial-style home in Columbus, Ohio. A quiet neighborhood where neighbors waved politely, but rarely knew much about each other. I was 44 years old, and Derek was 47. We shared a mortgage, a golden retriever named Biscuit, a kitchen we had remodeled twice, and a routine that had become so familiar it barely required thought. I worked as a senior editor for a regional health publishing company. The job was stable and respectable. Every morning I left for work at 8 and returned around 6. Most evenings I cooked dinner while Derek watched sports, or scrolled through his phone at the kitchen counter. Our marriage wasn't falling apart in a dramatic way. There were no explosive fights or major scandals. Instead, it was fading slowly, like a foundation developing tiny cracks that go unnoticed until the damage becomes impossible to ignore. My closest friend was Linda Chow. We had known each other since graduate school and shared more than 20 years of memories, birthday celebrations, conversations about terrible dates over glasses of wine, support through family losses, and celebrations of professional successes. Whenever I felt lost or uncertain, Linda was the person I called. At least, that's who I believed she was. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs. At the time, I simply chose not to. Derek began spending more time at the gym. That alone wasn't unusual for a man approaching 50. But then I noticed he would shower before leaving rather than afterward. He started texting late at night and kept his phone turned face down wherever he set it. Gradually, he stopped initiating conversations, physical affection, and plans for the future. When I suggested taking a trip to Vermont for our anniversary, he said he would think about it. He never mentioned it again. Linda was changing too. She started canceling our regular Thursday dinners, first once, then twice, and eventually it became routine. Her text messages grew shorter and more distant. Since she had always been busy, I convinced myself there was nothing to worry about. I spent that entire year convincing myself of things that weren't true. Then came the Saturday that changed everything. It was October. I remember because the sugar maple tree in our front yard had turned a brilliant shade of red, and I'd been planning to photograph it all week. That morning, Derek came downstairs carrying a single travel bag. The fact that he had packed only one bag told me immediately that this decision had been made long before that day. He placed it carefully beside the front door, and something about the way he did it made my stomach sink. "We need to talk," he said. What shocked me most was that he didn't look guilty. He looked relieved. "I'm leaving," he said. "I'm in love with Linda." The room didn't spin. I didn't collapse. I simply stood there in my kitchen, listening to the coffee maker finish brewing, while a cold, final feeling moved through me. "Linda," I repeated. "She makes me feel alive, Catherine," he said. "I'm sorry." "Get out," I replied quietly. I wasn't angry yet. I was certain. Without another word, he left. The front door clicked shut behind him, and the sound felt permanent. For a long time, I stood motionless in the kitchen. Then I looked out the window at the maple tree. It was still beautiful, still bright red, completely unaffected by the disaster unfolding inside my home. I didn't call anyone. I didn't cry. Instead, I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets. Biscuit came over and rested his head in my lap. As I stared at the ceiling, only one thought remained in my mind. So this is what it feels like to lose everything all at once. 6 days later, my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. "May I speak with Catherine Marsh Holloway?" a formal voice asked. "This is Catherine Marsh," I replied. I hadn't used the surname Holloway in more than 20 years. "My name is Robert Adler," the caller continued. "I'm a probate attorney in Portland, Oregon. I'm contacting you regarding the estate of Thomas Holloway, your former husband." He paused briefly. "Mr. Holloway passed away last month. According to his will, you are the sole beneficiary of his estate." I sat down slowly. "The estate is valued at approximately $4.2 million, he added. "However, there is one condition attached to the inheritance." Derek walked into Patricia's office, looking less like a man burdened by guilt and more like someone who had just discovered a calculation hadn't worked in his favor. He wasn't sorry, he was adjusting. "I heard you went to Portland," he said. I remained silent. "Gary uncovered something through a public record search," he continued. "A probate filing, Thomas Holloway." He paused, studying my reaction. "He left you money." My expression didn't change. "That's a private matter," I replied. "We're still legally married," Derek said carefully, "which means certain property laws could affect assets acquired during the marriage." Without looking up from her notes, Patricia spoke. "Ohio is not a community property state. It's an equitable distribution state. And you signed a separation agreement this morning." Derek glanced at her before turning back to me. "I want to revise that agreement." "You signed it 4 hours ago," Patricia said, "and it has already been filed." The silence that followed was revealing. It was the silence of someone realizing an opportunity had vanished before they reached it. "You planned this," Derek said. His voice had changed. The polite tone was gone, replaced by something colder. "I filed for divorce," I answered. "You left me for my best friend. What exactly did you think I would do?" He leaned forward. "Linda has connections. Her brother's a real estate attorney. The house situation could become very complicated." Patricia finally looked up. "The house situation is governed by the agreement your client signed and filed this morning. I strongly recommend you consult your attorney before continuing." Derek rose from his chair. The expression he gave me was meant to be contempt, but underneath it I saw panic. "You'll regret shutting me out," he said. "I already regret many things," I replied calmly. "This isn't one of them." Then he left. Only after the door closed did I realize my hands were shaking beneath the table. Patricia noticed immediately. "Go home," she said. "The hearing is in 4 days. We're prepared. Let me handle the legal side." So I went home. I fed Biscuit and spent hours sitting on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the fading October sunlight disappear beyond the neighboring yards. The fear was still there. Derek's threat wasn't entirely empty. Legal complications involving property could create delays. But the agreement had been filed. I had evidence. I had a court date. Most importantly, I had a future worth protecting. For 3 days, I allowed myself to rest. I watched mindless television. I made homemade soup. I took long walks with Biscuit through quiet streets lined with falling leaves. I spoke to no one. I simply let myself think. Then Linda called. Not a text this time. A direct call. I watched her name appear on my phone and let it ring until it stopped. 20 minutes later, she tried again. I declined once more. Then she left a voicemail. Her voice was carefully measured, the same tone she used in professional situations whenever difficult conversations arose. "Catherine, I know you're upset, and I understand why. But I think you're making decisions you may regret later. Derek and I know how this appears, but there are things you don't know, things about your marriage that Derek never told you. If we could just sit down and talk." She paused. "I'm reaching out as your friend. Please call me back." I deleted the message. Things you don't know about your marriage. It was a clever phrase, designed to create doubt, to make me question my own understanding of reality. The suggestion that I had been naive, that secrets had been kept for my own benefit, that betrayal somehow carried justification. After years spent editing psychological and behavioral content, I recognized the tactic immediately. What surprised me most was how calm I felt. Not numb, not broken. Calm. The shock had passed. Now I had something clearer. A deadline, a strategy, a purpose, a future. Derek and Linda still saw me as the woman abandoned in her kitchen, devastated and helpless. They were waiting for me to collapse. They were going to be disappointed. Still, determination alone isn't enough. I needed support. So I called my sister, Renee. She lived in Cincinnati, and until then, I'd been too proud to ask for help. This time, I told her everything: the affair, the divorce, the inheritance, the timeline. After a long silence, she simply said, "I'll be there Saturday." She arrived carrying a casserole dish and enough anger on my behalf for both of us. We sat at my kitchen table for hours. She listened. She asked thoughtful questions. She didn't try to turn the betrayal into some inspirational life lesson. She allowed it to be painful. And when I was ready, she helped me think about what came next. Renee had survived her own divorce years earlier. She understood something important. "The hardest part isn't the anger," she told me. "It's losing the identity you built around those relationships. For 11 years, you were Catherine and Derek. For 20 years, you were Catherine and Linda. Now you're neither of those things anymore." The truth of it hit me immediately. Terrifying. And strangely freeing. I also reached out to Janine, a colleague from our legal department. I kept the inheritance private, but I explained everything else. She listened carefully and then offered practical advice. Save every attempt they make to contact you. Screenshot everything. Keep records, timestamps, voicemails, messages, all of it. If their behavior crosses the line, documentation matters. That same night, I created a folder on my phone. By the end of the week, I had Patricia's legal guidance, Renee's support, Janine's practicality, and my own growing determination. The hearing was 3 days away. Derek and Linda had gone quiet. The silence itself felt strategic. They were watching, waiting, trying to predict my next move. What they didn't know was that I'd already decided. The decision had been made the day I sat on my kitchen floor with Biscuit after Derek left. I was going to win. 3 days before the hearing, Derek and Linda showed up at my house without warning. From the upstairs window, I saw Derek's car pull into the driveway. A chill ran through me. Not fear exactly. Something close to it. Linda was wearing the green coat I'd helped her choose the previous winter. Derek rang the bell. For a moment, I considered ignoring them. Then I remembered Janine's advice. Document everything. I activated the voice recorder on my phone, slipped it into my pocket, and went downstairs. When I opened the door, I stayed firmly in the doorway. They weren't invited inside. "We just want to talk," Derek said. His tone was familiar, the carefully controlled voice he used whenever he wanted disagreement to seem unreasonable. "Maybe we could sit at the kitchen table," Linda suggested, "like adults." "We can talk right here," I said. A brief silence followed. Then Derek spoke. "We're worried about you, Catherine. We think you may be making emotional decisions because you're hurt." "I filed for divorce," I replied. "You left me for my best friend. What alternative decision would you recommend?" Linda stepped forward. "You don't understand the full timeline," she said softly. "Things weren't what they seemed. I have your emails." Silence, instant and complete. Linda recovered first. "Those were private communications," she said. "Accessing them may actually create legal issues for you." "They were stored on a shared household computer in an uncleared browser history," I replied. "My attorney has already reviewed them." For the briefest moment, Derek looked at Linda. That single glance told me everything. They had misjudged me. They still believed I was the same woman who stood frozen in her kitchen in October. They hadn't realized she was gone. "What do you actually want?" I asked. Derek inhaled deeply. "The separation agreement. We'd like to revisit it, especially the house." There it was. Not concern, not reconciliation, not understanding. Money. "If your financial situation has changed," he continued, "then a reassessment would only be fair." "The agreement has already been filed," I said. "Agreements can be modified," Linda replied gently. "No one's threatening you. We're simply asking you to consider the bigger picture." "The bigger picture?" I repeated. "You're about to have substantial resources," Derek said, abandoning subtlety altogether. "There's no reason this needs to become hostile." I looked at both of them. Then I remembered Renee's words. "You're not those things anymore." For 20 years I had trusted Linda. For 11 years I had built a life with Derek. And now they stood on my porch asking me to share a gift left by a man who owed them nothing. "I'd like both of you to leave," I said. "Catherine, if either of you contacts me again outside official legal channels, I'll pursue a harassment complaint. My attorney has explained exactly where that line is." The mask finally slipped. Derek's expression hardened. "You're making an enemy." "I know," I replied. "Close the gate when you leave." Then I shut the door. The inheritance notification may have arrived after I filed for divorce, but the asset itself had absolutely nothing to do with my marriage to Derek. Thomas had been my husband nearly 3 decades earlier. Our relationship had ended 27 years before any of this happened. Patricia dismantled Gary's arguments one by one. No Ohio court had ever treated a premarital inheritance from a former spouse as marital property, and she had multiple legal precedents ready to support that position. The second claim was even weaker. To prove that Thomas had altered his will because of problems in my marriage, they would have needed evidence showing he knew about those issues and intentionally responded to them. That meant access to private records, correspondence, and proof that simply didn't exist. When Robert Adler was contacted, he confirmed that Thomas had signed his will 4 years earlier, long before any divorce proceedings began. At that time, I was still married to Derek, and Thomas had never expressed concern about my marriage or suggested he intended to revise his estate plans. The will had remained unchanged. The truth was much simpler. Thomas had quietly decided years earlier that if anything happened to him, he wanted his estate to go to the woman he had once married and never stopped wishing well. 6 weeks after filing, Gary Feltz withdrew the challenge. The news arrived in a brief single-page letter. Patricia forwarded it with a short message. "It's done." I sat alone in my office and read those 2 words several times. Then I placed the letter on my desk, folded my hands, and sat quietly. It wasn't celebration, it was relief. The kind of relief that comes when someone has been carrying tension for months and finally realizes they can put it down. For the first time in a very long while, I could breathe. I called Robert Adler that afternoon. "We can move forward," I said. "I'll prepare the transfer documents by the end of the week," he replied. The estate was finalized over the following months. The property in Bend sold first. The investment accounts were transferred. The remaining proceeds from Thomas's retained business interests were released from trust. After taxes and obligations were settled, the final amount I received was just over $3.1 million. I approached it carefully. No dramatic spending sprees, no impulsive decisions. I hired a financial advisor who specialized in helping people manage unexpected wealth. Together, we built a plan. I purchased a home outright in a neighborhood I had always admired. A significant portion of the money was invested conservatively. Some remained liquid and accessible. I also made a donation to an environmental organization Thomas had supported during his lifetime. It felt appropriate, a quiet way of honoring the generosity he had shown me. A few days later, Patricia sent me a bottle of wine. Attached was a handwritten note containing only 2 words. "Well done." I kept the note. The wine lasted 2 evenings. I drank it slowly on my back porch with Biscuit curled beside me while November stripped the trees bare and painted the sky in shades of gray and gold. The house Derek and I had shared eventually sold in April. According to the settlement agreement, we split the equity evenly. We each received $112,000. I added my portion to my financial reserves and moved into my new home the following month. Derek tried contacting me one final time. It was a text message. "I hope you know this wasn't personal." I showed it to Janine. She confirmed it wasn't legally significant. Then I blocked his number. There was nothing meaningful I could say to someone who believed abandoning his wife for her best friend, taking money from their shared savings, and attempting to claim part of her inheritance somehow wasn't personal. Some messages deserved no response, only silence. And by then, silence had become something I understood very well. Linda reached out once as well. A paper card arrived in February. On the front was a watercolor painting of snowdrops. Inside she had written, "I think of you often. I hope you're doing well." There was no return address. I suspect she knew I wouldn't respond. I threw it away. What surprised me most was that I no longer hated either of them. I had experienced the anger, the grief, the determination, the exhaustion, but eventually all of that passed. What remained was something far simpler: indifference. They existed. I existed. Our lives no longer intersected. I had my work. I had my home. I had Biscuit, who adapted to his new backyard with great enthusiasm. I had Renee, who spent a week helping me unpack and settle in. Most importantly, I had something I didn't possess before. I knew exactly what I was capable of. That knowledge is a kind of freedom. The following autumn, I realized something else. I had stopped waiting for disaster. That took longer than expected. When you spend months preparing for conflict, peace can feel unfamiliar. At first, the absence of danger doesn't feel safe. It feels suspicious. I began seeing a therapist that January, and she helped me recognize something important. Safety isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's simply the absence of fear. My new home in Bexley sat on a quiet street lined with mature trees and broad sidewalks. I had a dedicated office where I began consulting for smaller publishing companies alongside my regular work. The projects challenged me. People sought out my expertise. My opinions mattered. For years, I had made myself smaller than I needed to be. Agreeable, accommodating, invisible. I stopped doing that, and I discovered I didn't miss it. Life became fuller in ordinary ways. Biscuit turned 8 and remained wonderfully ridiculous. I developed friendships slowly and naturally. My neighbor Margaret, who cared deeply about bird feeders, turned out to be one of the funniest people I'd ever met. Janine and I began having lunch twice a month. Renee and I spoke every Sunday without fail. None of these relationships were dramatic. No one arrived and transformed my life. They were steady, reliable, built one conversation at a time. Those are the relationships that endure. In late spring, I traveled to Portland. I wanted to see the place Thomas had called home. I'm not entirely sure why. It simply felt important. His house had already been sold, but I walked through the neighborhood where he had lived and stood overlooking the city. I thought about the man who had been my husband for only 3 years, a man I had once cared for deeply, a man whose path had diverged from mine decades earlier, a man who, without expectation or obligation, had chosen kindness. I stood there for a long time. People walked dogs, children rode bicycles, the city carried on with its day. And I found myself thinking, I hope you knew. Not that I would eventually receive the money, not that I would win legal battles, just that your generosity mattered, that it reached someone who understood it, that it changed a life, that it wasn't wasted. That evening I had dinner alone overlooking the river. I ordered something unfamiliar, enjoyed a glass of Oregon Pinot Noir, watched the sunlight fade across the water, and for the first time in years, I felt completely grounded. As for Derek and Linda, news reached me occasionally through mutual acquaintances. Their relationship had not unfolded the way either of them expected. Living together revealed differences they had never confronted. Financial problems surfaced. Debt emerged. Expectations clashed. Arguments followed. Eventually, Derek moved into a small studio apartment across town. Linda remained where she was, struggling to manage her finances. Whether their relationship officially ended or simply collapsed under its own weight hardly mattered. Either way, the great love story they believed justified everything lasted less than 18 months. The passion that had supposedly been worth destroying a marriage and a 20-year friendship eventually became little more than financial stress and disappointment. I didn't feel satisfaction, only understanding. Some outcomes arrive exactly where they were always headed. I often remembered something Linda had said outside the courthouse. "I didn't take anything from you. I just got there first." She was wrong. Not because of Derek, because what she really took was trust. Not trust in him. Trust in my understanding of the people around me. Trust in the ground beneath my feet. Rebuilding that trust took longer than any court case, longer than any settlement. But eventually it happened. And when it did, it became stronger than before. A year after Derek walked out of our kitchen carrying that single bag, I sat on the porch of my new home watching Biscuit investigate something fascinating along the fence. The afternoon sunlight stretched across the yard. The air was warm for October, and I found myself thinking, this is mine. Not the house, not the inheritance, not the success. The life itself. The ordinary days. The freedom to wake up each morning knowing the direction of my life belonged entirely to me. I had paid dearly for that freedom, more dearly than I would ever have chosen, but it was mine, and I was grateful for it. October was beautiful again. The sunlight was golden. Biscuit remained endlessly curious, and for the first time in a very long time, everything felt exactly as it should. If this experience taught me anything, it was this. Betrayal reveals two truths at the same time. It shows you who other people really are, and it shows you who you are. I never truly understood my own strength until circumstances left me no choice but to discover it. Keep your plans private. Allow people to underestimate you, and never mistake someone's silence for weakness. Often, the quietest person in the room is simply the one who is prepared the most. What would you have done in my situation? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this story, thank you for staying with me until the very end.